All right, Phil, thanks very much for those remarks. Very much appreciated. And it's really an honor to be here addressing all of you. What I'd like to do to kick this thing off, let me start again. My comments are really about the incredible amount of change socially, politically, economically, technologically, that climbing has had, really fundamentally in North America, but globally too, over the last really 45 years. But before I do that, and it's a high-level narrative that I want to walk you through, kind of sets the stage here, I want to show you a little video that employees of Black Diamond put together. And the reason I want to show this is that my presentation's on all that has changed, but at the core, almost nothing has changed. And so we could run this. It's a 2-minute video, and it just gets you going here this morning. Get the volume up.
And ends up you're like living in your car and quitting your job.
I've made some sacrifices along the way, but I don't really view it as sacrifices because that's what I want to do. So I just spend my spare time doing that.
It's integrated completely into my life, and that's not by accident.
Look at my hands. They're the hands of an 80-year-old bricklayer. I mean, women don't have hands like this.
Without realizing it, I'm kind of framing my entire existence around this whole thing.
It was just all about how little could I work, how much could I save, and how long could I climb.
It's the partnerships and the time around camp where you're the most open that you're ever going to be.
Closest friendships that I've ever made resulted from climbing.
All the choices that I've made outside of climbing are to facilitate more climbing.
I wake up thinking about it, work on it all day, fall asleep thinking about it, probably think about it while I'm sleeping.
I have a truck because I can sleep in the back of it. I work at Black Diamond so I can write about climbing stuff and live in Utah so I can go rock climbing.
It's the dawn patrol, it's the ability to go catch the first light off the top of Olympus from North to West Slabs or South Ridge of Superior, or at the end of the day, do the same few pitches over and over again.
My friends, where I live, where I went to school, the jobs I've worked, my vacation, everything revolves around climbing.
I climb a lot. So wish I could climb more? Yeah, for sure.
When you have projects, you're dreaming about them, you're thinking about them all the time.
Basically everything that I've done has been related to rock climbing in some way.
It's just who I am and what I do.
I wake up in my van, have coffee, have breakfast with my wife, and spend the day climbing the desert. Go to bed early because I'm tired because we won't climb the next day.
I'm always going to be a climber. There's no doubt in my mind.
All right, I thought that was a nice way to kick this conference off, because at the core, this is what we're speaking about, right? The spirit, the ethos, the values of something that is more than a sport. It's a life-defining activity for so many of us. So let me start this way, and I have to apologize for you that I can ad-lib, but I can't get my thoughts across as well as if I read them. So I put them together as a presentation, and I will read them. So the need for a conference like this, when I started climbing over 45 years ago, would have seemed laughable. It was at a time when you could have El Capitan to yourself. And in the scheme of Western civilization, 45 years is not even the blink of an eye. But in the accelerating growth of both participation in the sport and the attack on the integrity of our public lands, 45 years is truly a millennium. I think hopefully that we are at a true tipping point in the ascendancy and the philosophy and practice of sustainability and all those engaged in managing the environments where we indulge our passions. So the purpose of my talk this morning is to both cast a spotlight on just how far, how fast, and from where and why this activity of climbing and mountaineering has come, and to do so with the purpose of highlighting why we must do more to protect the sustainability of our passions and of the place. I also want to use this address to briefly celebrate the rich vitality of climbing, canyoneering, and mountaineering communities worldwide. And in this year of 2014, acknowledge that the vibrancy, certainly of climbing in America, was far from a given just 4 decades ago. Today, in America, climbing, mountaineering, and backcountry skiing are truly mainstream outdoor activities, and that's something none of us who are climbers, telemarketers, backpackers, or river runners in the early 70s would have ever thought possible. And to really understand both the recent evolution of climbing and mountaineering, you need to see the history of the sports from the 30,000-foot level. From here, you can look down and clearly see the broad sweep of Western history. And throughout this history, 2 generic narratives appear over and over and over. Throughout this you can change the dates, you can change the people, you can change the cultures, but the narratives always remain the same. The first is that of nomadic cultures living in equilibrium with the land. This harmony continues until these people inevitably come into conflict with an encroaching, exploitative, and extractive culture. We all know how that narrative ends. The second theme is that of civilizations suddenly disappearing because of some sort of cataclysmic event, with a plague, drought, or geological event. The history of the human-powered recreation community in America manifests its narrative in both of these historical paths. We'll discuss how in a moment, but first let me return to the 5,000-foot level and the present tense. So all of us are here this morning in Golden, Colorado, and there's no way to put it other than this. Golden is a place of incredible beauty and great inspiration. The mountains and canyons that rise up above us here this morning forged who I am as a climber, as a skier, and as an alpinist. They may have done the same for many of you here. From the bouldering at Morrison, to backcountry skiing in the Indian Peaks, to the classic routes of El Dorado Canyon, this place wasn't simply about leading a route or working out the moves of a tricky crux. Rather, it was the total experience that permeated itself into every day of my life. Being in this place reminds me that pursuing our passion for climbing is more than a sport. It's truly a way of life. And I believe this way of life consists of 3 very separate but equal elements. And I think this video that the BD folks put together captured that. It starts with the activity of climbing itself, the athletic and physical demands, the commitment and the adventure. There's a simple joy to the sport we all practice. When life feels complicated, climbing and finding a way when no easy way exists truly helps to simplify it. The second element of this life is the community and the culture of our sport. In a few words, it might simply be called the brotherhood of the road. We commit ourselves to a partner for successes. We share epics, fear, and the pure joy of being outside. We work together in collaboration, not competition. These shared experiences link us together as a community, no matter where we go. The third element of climbing, alpinism, and mountaineering includes the sublime places where we ply our craft, lay down our sleeping bags, and brew a morning coffee. When you wake up on the Diamond's Broadway, you don't need to believe in any religion to know something supreme has crafted these amazing places. And they inspire us to fight for their access, for their preservation, and their stewardship. These spaces help keep our lives in perspective, and they do remind us of our humanity. These 3 integral elements are why climbing has been such a compelling force in my life, and probably a reason why they've had an impact on all of you as well. Climbing and mountaineering combine the physical and mental challenges I crave, the community I feel most at home with, and the added benefit of immersing myself in stunning, soul-searching scenery. These activities define me, who I am as a person, and they have most likely done the same for many of you. Looking to meld your personal passion with your professional acumen may well be the strongest bond between all of us here in this room this morning. But this sport, this activity, is extremely young here in the USA. You really only have to go back to 1957 when an 18-year-old Yvon Chouinard started making pitons in his backyard to reach the beginning of modern American climbing. Yvon's pitons had the benefit of repeated use, and soon climbers were exploring the bigger walls with new confidence. The creation of Chouinard equipment and the elevation of climbing standards that followed marks the beginning of the modern age of climbing in North America. A decade later, the first North Face store opened in Berkeley, California on a Friday night in 1968. Here was a store that catered specifically to the outdoor community. Before that time, finding gear for your specific sport was difficult to nearly impossible. The band that played that Friday evening in Berkeley included none other than some unknown guitarists, one by the name of Bob Weir and the other was Jerry Garcia, while security was provided by the Oakland chapter of Hell's Angels. At that time, we were all counterculture, living a life completely removed from everyday America. Even as recently as 1975, when I climbed the nose of El Cap, we were almost alone on that route. There weren't lines at the base of crags, no bottlenecks to slow us down on popular routes. Camping in Camp 4 was simply a matter of laying out your sleeping bag. If you wanted to stick around for a summer or two, you might even think about pitching a tent. We lived in our own world, outside the mainstream. We were nomadic. We were the fringe. Think of it this way. When I first visited the Shawangunk in the fall of 1969, I ran into the European pre-war old guard of Hans Kraut and Fritz Wiesner, as well as the current guard of Rich Goldstone, Dick Williams, and Jim McCarthy here this morning. All in my first weekend there. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, not even 15 years old, climbing next to my heroes. At that time, modern American climbing was so young, the history was still very tangible. It was alive, it was real, it was in front of you. Your heroes were the guys you were climbing next to during the day and illegally drinking beer with at night at meals. I was alive. I'd been a kid raised in New York City and its boroughs, vicariously living the adventures of Huck Finn and the Little Rascals out of books and TV. And suddenly I found my answer to Spanky and his gang. I realized that climbing, the gunks, and the tribe, that was it for me. It gave me the freedom to strike out for, as Huck Finn said, the territory ahead. My point with these stories is that our sports, whether we were mountaineering, climbing, or backcountry skiing, were counterculture. They were iconoclastic, they were unconventional. We were a tiny group of users then, a tribe, and we operated below the radar screen. Our small size allowed us to live in a perpetual stealth-like fashion, as if our sport and our industry and our way of life didn't even exist. We stealthily snuck around the country climbing anything that caught our eyes, and no one cared. As climbers and mountaineers and backcountry skiers in the 70s and early 80s, we essentially lived a nomadic existence. We camped, and I do use that term in the very broadest of sense, wherever we needed in order to pursue our sport. We traveled with the tribe, according to the sun, and like Chief Joseph's winter encampments, we found refuge in places like Kemmer, Wyoming, where we worked in the oil rigs, or down the road from here in Boulder, Colorado, making furniture at Contemporary Comfort, so we could get through the winter while squirreling away enough cash for the summer. We were living the James Dean existence, doing what we wanted, when we wanted. We were the embodiment of Eric Beck's quote, which, if you've not heard it, that at either end of the economic spectrum lies the leisure class. And for us, there was no question as to what end we were living on. And it all worked fine as long as our group mirrored reality. So let's pause for a minute and return to that 30,000-foot view I spoke of earlier, the ones that appear repeatedly throughout Western culture. Well, this is the point in my story where those themes and the history of climbing and mountaineering in North America collide. In the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, we were the nomadic culture, living in equilibrium, so to speak, with the land. But a conflict was brewing. Storm clouds we didn't see at the time were forming on the horizon. Without realizing it, we were headed to our own cataclysmic event. By the late 1980s, there was nothing stealthy about climbing, mountaineering, or off-piste skiing, or even kayaking. Our numbers had swollen. We weren't simply a few tents scattered about Camp 4, nor the odd expedition flying into the Ruth Amphitheater. To give you a sense of the growth during the 1980s, let me illustrate it this way. When I arrived to take over the running of Keynote equipment at the summer of 1982 as its general manager, its annual sales were still under $1 million a year, having taken 25 years to get there. Between 1983 and 1989, I grew Keynote's revenue sixfold. Climbers, mountaineers, and off-piste skiers were drawn to this sport in unheard of numbers. During this growth, however, we were all still holding to the ideal that ours was somehow a fringe activity. Clearly, our beliefs had become detached from reality. Then came 1989, and everything changed. This was the cataclysmic moment for North American climbers, mountaineers, and off-piste skiers, and really other human-powered recreationalists. It's what I've called the Big Bang. The Big Bang was a culmination of many factors, but three in particular stand out. To begin with, the revolution in tort law throughout the 1980s completely upended our sheltered bubble. If modern outdoor sports and climbing had existed for 30 years as though it was inside the protection of an eggshell, the revolution in tort law was the hammer. In legalese, the scope of tort liability expanded through the 80s, which meant that tort law increasingly favored the plaintiffs. In other words, by 1989, if you happened to be a landowner, public or private, you suddenly realized you could be sued by any of the climbers, boulderers, or off-piste skiers you allowed across your property. The threats to skiing, both in and out of bounds, were profound as well as to climbing. A fear of litigation swept through the country from private landowners to government land managers. To add to the worries of litigation, the late 80s saw an unprecedented rise in the number of participants climbing, mountaineering, and backcountry skiing. The birth of sport climbing and the placement of fixed anchors in wilderness and public lands added another major new challenge and complexity. Land managers had their hands full. The cumulative effects of tort reform, thousands of new active outdoor participants, and fixed anchors resulted in the closing, the restricting, or threatened shutdown of many climbing, skiing, and boating areas in North America. Also in 1989, in the face of half a dozen impending lawsuits and now unsustainable insurance premiums, Keynote equipment declared bankruptcy. And here was an icon of American and global climbing, the company that had started the modern big wall, free, and ice climbing revolutions, brought to an end by the popularity of the sport it had championed. So these were the three forces that created the Big Bang and changed the course of modern climbing, off-piste skiing, and mountaineering in America forever. These three events collectively had the effect of not just a shot across the bow of our ship, but a full-on direct hit and explosion. I think this was society's way of forcing our sport and our passions to pass from adolescence into adulthood. The Big Bang represented our loss of innocence and our potential coming of age. This was also a period when the public lands really began to feel the ever-growing siege of a host of very powerful, extractive economic industries that wanted to basically privatize the value of these public lands for their exclusive benefit. Simultaneously, advances in compact and increasingly powerful internal combustion engines ignited an explosion in both summer and winter motorized recreation. So the one thing that was clear in 1989 was that climbers, mountaineers, and off-piste skiers could no longer rely on the individualism and the bohemian lifestyle to see them through. Either we made the transition from a band of guerrillas to that of, if not statesmen, at least operatives who no longer worked outside of the system. We needed to both accept and leverage the growth of our sport and the seemingly dynamic legal, cultural, social, and attitudinal shift that has swept the country, and to work together for our collective benefit. In some ways, the Big Bang changed the sports I loved and in some ways it would never be the same again. But as I attempted to illustrate with the video, is that at its core, nothing has changed. At this time, some folks wanted to walk away from these events, dispirited by the new circumstances, but others saw the situation as a challenge, a call to action. As a product of those early days, we're all a close-knit tribe. I and others felt that now more than ever, we needed champions to advocate on behalf of the community. It was a catalytic moment for all of us. And so in 1989, I led the creation of Black Diamond, the phoenix rising out of the bankrupt assets of Keynote Equipment, for two primary purposes. The first was, of course, that of continuing the Diamond C's tradition of making innovative, cutting-edge gear, but equally important was a commitment to make a difference on behalf of a climbing and mountaineering community we all saw as an integral and defining part of ourselves. I believe Aldo Leopold summed up my feelings and many others at the time when he wrote, "We abuse land because we see it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and with respect." This is where our ethos as climbers, as mountaineers, and as off-piste skiers is and must remain. It is why all of us are here today. As mountaineers and as climbers, I believe we're hardwired to accept adversity and view it as a challenge, not as an obstacle. We're accustomed to dealing with bad weather, bad rock, avalanche danger, and making the most of whatever situation confronts us. In a nutshell, all of us are pragmatic dreamers who are resourceful, find opportunity in challenge, and consider crisis as an opportunity in drag. In other words, we don't take no for an answer. We understand that the stars don't always align, so we come back over and over and over until we're successful. That's the attitude and the spirit that climbers and mountaineers from the 1989's brink had. Collectively, we have gone from outcast to mainstream. 30 years ago, we purposely slipped through the cracks. Today, we are actively working directly with land managers to craft our own future. Today's Haydukes, the radicals among us, now wear a sport jacket during the week and work the halls of state capitals, Congress, and federal agencies, working within the system to preserve the places of great importance to all of us. We're working to secure the vibrancy of our sport. When we lived as renegades, the extractive industries were the employers of the day. Now in many places around the country and around the world, the outdoor industry, climbing, mountaineering, the human-powered sports are the primary source of jobs and economic prosperity. These are sustainable and clean entrepreneurial businesses that attract people from all over the world. They can't be copied or made more cheaply overseas. They are unique to our sports and to the American outdoors. With growing numbers of participants every day, the U.S. outdoor industry contributes over $730 billion to the American economy each year. These businesses are highly recession-resistant and generate $88 billion in annual state and federal tax revenue. From Talkeetna, Alaska, to New Paltz, New York, to North Conway, New Hampshire, the active outdoor recreation economy supports 6.5 million American jobs that cover the gamut from manufacturing, climbing equipment, to guiding, to teaching, to outfitting, to operating a pizza restaurant in the Red River Gorge. However, the outdoor industry's ability to create these economic benefits depends on the health and the vibrancy of our public lands for its continued success. As human-powered sports participants, access to well-preserved, well-stewarded landscapes, including wilderness and alpine wilderness, are essential to us. In 1972, Yvon Chouinard penned a piece for Scent magazine entitled "Cunard Mouths Off," in which he expressed his negative sentiments on the growth and popularization of climbing and the denigration of ethics. With the benefit of hindsight, it appears to me he was a dozen years early, but that's not atypical for Yvon. But that change he spoke to, that of driving more people to the sport, has accelerated exponentially. And let me just take a moment to illustrate some points as I look back over the expanse of the last 45 years, or a little bit longer. In 1973, or 1972, the winter of 72-73, I spent over a year, planning an expedition to Alaska to do what was then the fourth ascent and a new route on Mount Fairweather in Alaska. 40 years earlier, Bradford Washburn had attempted the first ascent of this peak, and he was, for us, a major source of photos and information that resulted in 2 trips up to the Boston Museum of Science. On our successful climb, we used leather boots, wool clothes, cotton poplin jackets, Primus stoves, and McKinley tents. Not all that different from what Brad had used. Likewise, the manner in which we researched the information, traveled on land, cross-country, and by boat to the mountain was also not that different than what Brad had done in the 30s. The 40 years separating Brad's and my expedition did not represent material difference in approach, gear, information, communication, nor access. Conversely, in the 40 years since, everything has changed. Multiple revolutions in gear and apparel, climbing standards, cheap flights, the internet, smartphones, nearly free global communications, and the ability to access in real time information, weather, photos, route conditions, in a manner that we would have called science fiction just 2 decades ago. The innovative expedition concept, descriptively labeled as smash and grab, is a result of optimizing and leveraging those tools. What would have been a multi-week or more than a month-long expedition to Alaska with a winter of planning is now a little more than a week of planning and an extended weekend out of Salt Lake, as witnessed this spring by Black Diamond employees who did Mount Huntington in that manner, or another employee who with a bit more time did both Seratori and Fitzroy with just 10 days out of the office. In 1982, when I went to work for Yvonne after 3 years of instructing for the Colorado Outward Bound School, I did so in part because my passion to guide just seemed to be so non-economically sensical. Last year, the AMGA published the economic impact of guiding in America, and we realized we had a very important industry with great gainful employment. In Salt Lake City, 1992, we opened the Christian Griffiths-designed rock creation climbing gym at Black Diamond on our campus. It was one of the top 3 climbing gyms in the United States, and we wondered if it would be economically viable with the scale of the $500,000 investment that had been made. This spring, after a 22-year successful run, we dismantled our state-of-the-art climbing gym because it had become to today's climbing gym what a Commodore 64 computer is to a laptop. In addition, there are now 4 great climbing gyms, not to mention big climbing walls at rec centers within 30 miles or so. What I'm trying to illustrate with these multiple triangulation points is to show and confirm that the forces driving growth in our sport are only accelerating, and it's with that mindset that we need to approach the next couple of days with. 1989 proved catalytic, and as a result, we are now most fortunate to have strong user advocacy groups in place, upping the game, gaining support, and working on our behalf. I'm speaking here, just to mention a few, obviously, of such national user groups as the American Alpine Club and the Access Fund, not to mention the larger Outdoor Alliance, as well as Winter Wildlands and dozens of regional groups such as the Salt Lake Climbers Alliance. However, all of us must realize that we still continue to struggle to achieve even a junior seat at the table of other economic interests that develop land use policy in this country. Fortunately, federal and state land managers tasked with maintaining the legacy of lands, rivers, lakes, and mountains of our amazing American outdoors are now making the connection that their best partner is those of us in the human-powered recreation community. An overlap between the goals of conservationists and recreationists exists, but its power is only now beginning to be realized. And I believe that it is this three-way alliance that, as Robert Frost so famously wrote, will make all the difference. In closing, let me leave you with a few thoughts to chew on as you work through the next few days. The first is that of John Sawhill, who so thoughtfully observed, For in the end, our society will be defined not by what we create, but what we refuse to destroy. That's a big part of what mountain sustainability is all about and why we're here. The second one is the sharp insight of the renowned anthropological writer Margaret Mead, who observed, quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So may all of you here today consider yourselves just that, as part of Margaret Mead's small group of thoughtful citizens that can change and will change the world, so our sports and our mountains remain as vibrant for our children and their children as they have been for us and those who came before us. Thank you.